So I'll say the other thing again because it's important.
Bertolt Brecht.
Bertolt Brecht and his wife Lolly had a theater, a famous theater in eastern Berlin, which was after the Potsdam Agreement had been given to the Russians. And we had a special because we were students, college students, and because um, we were theater majors, we had a special agreement that we could go into Eastern Berlin because at that time, that was the first time when we were there in 1961 was when they built up Checkpoint Charlie, which was a place you no longer could pass freely from Eastern Berlin to Western Berlin and back again. They'd started building a wall. Um, at that time, they rolled um, wire, uh, baling wire across the opening from the Brandenburg Gate to, and that was the Brandenburg Gate was between Eastern Berlin and Western Berlin. When we were given, the United States was given within that Russian territory half of Berlin, half of the city. And that's why we were there. We were doing army bases and we were playing to um, soldiers in Western Berlin. So we had, because we were students, we had this uh, permission to go into Eastern Berlin. And the deal was that because at the end of the Potsdam Agreement, the two sides, the U.S. side and the Russian side, did not have to show passports. They could pass freely from one to the other. Let's see, what else do you need to know? Well, so the Russians were not saying, they were saying that Eastern Berlin belonged to the Germans, the Eastern Germans, and the Eastern Germans were sympathetic with the Russians, which was not true. We put a lot of money into Western Berlin, and they put no money into Eastern Berlin. It was very, very broken down, still from the war, 10 years later. Not much had been done to build it up. It's like going into a war zone. So we got on a bus to go to see Bertolt Brecht's theater. Bertolt Brecht wrote The Three Penny Opera, which you maybe know about, and I'm trying to think what its proper name is now. I don't know, they made it into a lot of different things. So we got on the bus, we were students, and there were some other people on the bus, and we drove into to Checkpoint Charlie, which was halfway between. And then we went over to the Eastern Berlin side, and they stopped us and said we couldn't go any farther unless we showed our passports. And at that point, the government was sticking by the Potsdam Agreement, so we got stuck in a bus at Checkpoint Charlie, halfway into, well, more than halfway into Eastern Berlin, and we couldn't move. We couldn't go forward, and the people who were in charge weren't letting us go backwards. They were holding their own. And about that time, the Russian soldiers started circling the bus and making fun of the people on the bus. The guns began to train out of the windows that were facing the road into Eastern Berlin. They were Russian guns. And people on the bus got into a fight. There was somebody who made a comment about the man who was running our tour, who was Jewish, and Lou picked it up and went after the guy. So there was a fight on the bus. There were Russian soldiers going all around the bus, and there were guns training on, and these planes were going around. Eventually, what happened was that we backed down and back into Western Berlin, and I was pretty angry with the U.S. government for they obviously knew that this was going to happen. They were trying to get some press And so they sent students in so people would be sympathetic with the US position, and they risked our lives. So when I got back to the place where we were staying in Dahlem in Berlin, I wrote a long letter to Bach saying how angry I was with the US government for using us in that way. And then I went across the street. We were eating in a place that was had been designated for all the Nazi scientists, and they lived a pretty high life. But they were gone, we were there, and we had dinner across the street. And when I came back to my room, the letter had disappeared. Looked everywhere for it, it was gone. They'd come and they'd taken the letter away. It was a long letter. I never did write it again. But obviously they didn't want anything to go out that was anti-US. And that's the story. That's the whole story.